The Awakening of Joel Singer, Part 10, Into the Fray. Written by Scott McCaffrey. Narrated by Luke Welland. Chief Malone got back to her brownstone bone-tired. She almost forgot sometimes that police commissioner was her actual title. So much did she use and prefer her former honorific. But not these past 2 weeks. Commissioner Malone, do you have any leads on who murdered the CVs? Commissioner Malone, how could over 100 of the city's CVs be killed like that? And then only a week later, Commissioner Malone, how did more than 100 young people in the city just drop dead? Did you know some of them were under 15? Commissioner Malone, were you aware the CVs had these killing devices? Days after that. Commissioner Malone, did you see these DNA tracking devices when you were a police captain? How about the surveillance devices? Regarding the last set of questions, she said she couldn't comment on an ongoing investigation, one in which she might be implicated. An evasive answer from a woman known for her candor, an answer that just drew more suspicion. But she wasn't dumb enough to ignore her lawyer's advice. She opened her stained oak door and stepped inside her airy living room to find her cleaning lady had signed for a package. It was heavy and had no return address. Her curiosity overrode her caution, and she opened the cardboard box. Inside was a note with letters cut from magazines. The message was simple. Thanks for nothing. Below that was $50,000 cash in unmarked bills. She pondered a minute, then put the cash carefully in her safe. Major Chase Pascal, his strawberry blonde beard a little ragged from the long flight, looked down on the largely flat terrain and the seemingly endless array of scraggly taiga trees. They'd been flying, albeit slowly, for 3 hours now over the sparsely planted trees, each about 10 feet tall, spread amongst dull green wild grass all over the flat land of the subarctic in northeastern Alaska, just south of the Arctic National Wildlife Refuge. A fleet of over 50 planes, mostly other F-35Bs with vertical landing capability, trailed behind them. The intelligence report said they were about to come upon a massive complex, large as a mid-sized college campus but more advanced. The reports had taken rather uneducated guesses at what armaments awaited them. They ranged from nothing to missile batteries using DNA tracking technology. The reports agreed that the CVs were hesitant to kill unless absolutely necessary, but were vague on what that meant, and if, say, a fleet of incoming fighter jets would meet the standard. His navigation device indicated they had just flown over the site, but they had flown over nothing but homogeneous tundra for hours. The co-pilot looked ahead. "You did fly over the site," he said. "Take it down to 500 feet this time." 500 feet, that's point-blank range. I guess the fellow who wrote these instructions is in the "these guys are really hesitant to use lethal force" camp. As they flew over the indicated area, the same sparse landscape continued, and then they saw it. Rising over 300 feet in the air and with seating for over 5,000 people was a state-of-the-art sports stadium. That would have been more than unusual in the wilderness. Even more striking was the almost perfect camouflage used. A tarp had been thrown over the playing field, fit for football or soccer. The covering, as well as the seats themselves, were the perfect blend of colors to match the surrounding landscape. Pine greens mixed with brighter shades juxtaposed by patchy browns. Rough textures had even been used on the shroud covering the scoreboard, and many of the seats to further the illusion. They both agreed the facility would be invisible at even 3,000 feet, the minimum height at which any plane would be overhead in the rarely used airspace. Now primed to see the subtle differences between the buildings, they saw what looked like a campus center, an indoor sports complex, classroom buildings, and dormitories. No weaponry was visible. Take away the strange location and fastidious cloaking, and they could indeed have been flying over a college campus. The pilot began to set the F-35B down. "We're landing? We're not taking this complex out?" the co-pilot asked. "That's right, our instructions were to land if we met no resistance in the air." Pascal signaled the other aircraft to do the same. "Now what?" "Now we have a look around. Headquarters instructed that an absence of resistance at this point was indicative the complex is abandoned. Unless it's indicative that they want to kill or capture us more easily. That's the other possibility. Let's have a look around, Pascal said, then called the others to spread out amongst the vast complex. Various forklifts and other loading equipment stood at the ready in some of the other planes for the advanced technology they were to capture if possible. They stepped out onto the permafrost. Major Pascal and his partner, Captain O'Halloran, were part of a very special crew. Special forces trained in recon from ground or air, able to fly themselves to their own missions. Both men were sturdy and carried themselves with an air of competency. Although the light summer breeze rustled more gray hairs on Pascal's beard than the captain's. In just over 24 hours, Dr. Harrington's deadline would pass. Their regiment's presence here in Alaska allowed him to venture a pretty good guess what the president's response was going to be. "Should we check out the stadium first?" the co-pilot asked. "What the hell?" Pascal replied as his curiosity got the better of him. The stadium was not at all hidden at ground level, nor was it ever meant to be. It now simply looked like the stadium had been decorated by an overzealous survivalist. The permafrost felt like skimpy astroturf as they took in the brisk air. Captain O'Halloran trotted into the stadium and onto the field, waving on 60 fellow soldiers. They grabbed at the edge of the tarp as a group, barely slowing down to giddily pick up the massive covering and roll it to the side, leaving a few unlucky friends caught up in the tarp as they fell. They bemoaned loudly the lack of compassion shown to them even as they laughed. Someone picked up one of several footballs, and an impromptu and chaotic game began on the pristine field. "I don't think they can pay me enough in this market," one joked as he drop-kicked a wayward ball about 20 feet in the general direction of a goalpost. "Yeah, the TV rights are for shit up here," another said as he threw a pass. The major called them in just as a would-be receiver tripped over a bench. The captain sent most of the men in teams of 10 to the other buildings on the campus, while the last 10 were told to stand at the ready about 50 yards from a certain inconspicuous taiga tree. The major took out his tablet, read some coordinates, and scanned the tree. He found a slight bump on it that was indistinguishable from others. He tapped against the bump quickly 6 times, paused for 2 seconds, then tapped 3 times. For a moment, nothing happened. Then, with the sound of unseen wheels turning and cables pulling, a chasm began to open. The sight left the men awestruck. One had to be yanked backward from the gap that opened right underneath him. From a safe vantage point, the soldiers looked 10 feet down to a dimly lit steel slab, housing anything or nothing underneath. On one side of the 20-foot by 30-foot hole was a large platform elevator, suitable for transporting people and heavy equipment. "How'd you know that code?" Captain O'Halloran asked his partner. "We got some cooperation from someone on the inside, someone high up." "Who?" the co-pilot ventured. "Someone high up enough to know that code," Pascal responded in a justifiably flippant manner. "I got this code all figured out down here," another of the men said from the platform onto which he had scrambled. The pilot looked down to see a prominent down button mounted on the wall. "1 comedian per team is plenty," Major Pascal replied as the rest of them climbed down the ladder and onto the platform. The elevator traversed 50 feet downward, where they were met by 2 huge steel doors. Joel sat in an interrogation room at CIA headquarters. The room was typical of what he had seen on TV. The building was not. They had blindfolded him, forcing him to use infrared vision to see his route. He'd been driven in a bulletproof limousine to a helicopter, then flown to a government jet at a military base. Finally, he'd been taken here, past several heavily guarded checkpoints to the huge complex. There were 2 main buildings, a modern glass one and an older stone building, consisting of several connecting compartments. Arriving at a garage in the rear of the stone building, his blindfold had been removed, and he was led through the largest compartment and brought here through antiseptic hallways. Joel sat in the sparse room for half an hour before a professional-looking agent finally came in and undid Joel's handcuffs. He sat across from Joel. "Where am I?" Joel asked. "What am I being charged with? Who are you?" The agent loosened his tie. "I guess you didn't watch much TV up there in Alaska. Otherwise, you'd know that we ask the questions and you answer them." "Why is there only one of you now?" Joel asked, ignoring the agent's stipulation, "when that huge force was sent to the Reform Center?" The agent shook his head with a smile. Okay, I will answer that one in the hope of getting on track here. Based on the reports we've gotten, even that armada we sent to your reform center couldn't have forced you to surrender, so we figure you're behaving yourself. Is that right? Well, I would much rather work this out through cooperation. For one thing, my reform center needs government certification. See, now maybe you really are a genius. But tell me, you could have crushed that whole crew we sent there, no? Maybe. And you could bust out of this place right now, couldn't you? Perhaps. The agent grew visibly frustrated. Perhaps? Don't you have superhuman abilities? No. No? The agent said incredulously. All of our reports are wrong? I'm a human. All my abilities are human abilities. That's not the way we see it. I suppose it depends on one's perspective, then. No sooner did Joel say this than another man came in, accompanied by 2 wary guards. But it wasn't just another agent this time. It was the Secretary of Defense himself, Jack Romwell, dapper in a gray suit and closely cropped hair. Romwell waved his guards away and addressed the agent. Maybe, perhaps, depends on your perspective. I tell you, I think we've let this gentleman get too close to Washington already, Romwell said with a smile. Thanks, Martin. I'll take it from here. The agent looked as uncomfortable about leaving as the guards had before him, but he complied. Romwell took a seat across from Joel. We're not really alone, Romwell said. But then you knew that, didn't you? And please don't answer perhaps. I did, Mr. Secretary. There we go. I'll tell you what. If I ask you about what you can do and you're 99% sure you could do it, just round up from perhaps to yes. For us mere mortals. Joel nodded. Tell me, son, Romwell said, leaning in close. Over in North Korea, you sent out signals. Waves that replicated a drug effect. Yes. And we know you helped build a device that replicated a drug effect on people who had used the poison darts on the CVs. Tweaked it, yes. So, could you send out such signals to work on a specific person? Say, the president? Rounding up now. Yes. A lethal signal? Causing her body to produce anthrax, for example? Joel paused. I don't know that I could cause someone's body to produce anthrax. There would be far simpler ways to produce a lethal effect. I could signal the body to release massive amounts of histamine, shutting down respiration, causing anaphylactic shock and death. Thank you. So, you're concerned about losing your reform center. That's understandable and exploitable, admittedly by us and by Dr. Harrington as well. Yes. Is that what happened? Is that how he got you to help with those revenge killings? I helped reduce the number of deaths. I don't see you as the type to be involved in killings in any way, shape, or form. Do you have a question, Mr. Secretary? I do. Did you and Dr. Harrington have a falling out over those killings? Joel replied that they had, and went on to relate his reluctance to have been involved in the CV's revenge attack. Romwell rubbed his chin as Joel finished describing what he called Dr. Harrington's extortion, his threat to kill people far more indiscriminately and voluminously if Joel had not helped him. Romwell leaned in with a serious, intense demeanor. Will you help us, Joel? Joel was surprised. I'm the last person he would have given any useful information recently. No, son. I mean, will you fight with us? Will you fight with your country, if it comes to that? If you do fight for us, no charges will be brought against you, and the charter for your reform center will not be revoked. That is my offer. I wish I had more time to butter you up, but I don't. Joel nodded solemnly. I have to think about it, he finally replied. Romwell shook his head. Son, you've had 2 years to think about it, and a full year while Dr. Harrington and his men have been acting like maniacs, killing, maiming, causing chaos. And all the baggage for the mayhem has been laid at the doorstep of your country. Joel's face reddened. Excuse me, Mr. Secretary, but your administration has been around these 2 years as well. And during the early part of those years when Dr. Harrington's missions were going well, I never heard about complaints. If anything, there were leaks about your tacit approval and support. The secretary nodded approvingly at Joel's defiance, which somehow made the knot in Joel's stomach grow tighter. You're right. We did make a mistake by giving free rein to Dr. Harrington for so long. That goes for him and all his handiwork, don't you think? Joel did not miss the implication. I'm not sure what you mean, Mr. Secretary. You tell me that you have to think about our offer. I don't know what the hell I'm going to do. I'm afraid that's untenable for us, Romwell said. He then made a request for agents to enter to seemingly no one, but nevertheless Joel found himself surrounded within moments by Black Ops agents who moved quickly but warily in their black and navy suits. The agents made no move to detain Joel. He saw why a minute later when he complied with the secretary's request to step out into the hallway. Out in the more open space was an apparatus that looked custom-made for him. It was like a spacesuit on wheels that had been blown up like a balloon and then covered with Teflon. The arms melded into the sides at the hip, and the legs had no joints. We nicknamed it the Cocoon, Romwell said. I imagine you've deduced this didn't come off an assembly line. 2-inch thick Teflon over a half-inch of lead. We threw in some padding underneath and a built-in cooling suit. A single unit to prevent movement, Joel observed. And the lead to prevent transmissions. Romwell nodded. You've been very cooperative so far, Joel. We appreciate that. Now, I'd ask that you continue to go nice and easy and step into the suit. Joel eyed the suit with obvious apprehension. Stepping into it does have its benefits. If things get ugly with our mutual friend, no one can say you were involved, Romwell said. Well, not honestly, anyway, Joel replied flatly. He looked around at the stoic faces of the agents, meticulously selected and trained all. Their composure was a cracked veneer to him, like a debonair man in a fine tuxedo with a tear in the seat. He heard the elevated heartbeats, smelled the increased perspiration, and sensed the increased electrical activity as calcium ions were released to pump out increased adrenaline. But there were exceptions. The most notable was Secretary Romwell. He and a couple others had become increasingly relaxed. No, not increasingly relaxed, increasingly less impressed, increasingly less afraid. I'd like to talk to a lawyer, Joel finally said. Romwell seemed to have expected the request. I'm afraid there's a problem there. You see, the right to a lawyer, all that other good stuff, that's for citizens. I am a citizen. I was born in the United States. Oh, born? I'm not quite sure about that. Murphy? Yes, sir, one of the agents responded. You have Mr. Singer's file, don't you? Murphy pulled out the file. What does it say about Mr. Singer's birth and citizenship? It says here that he was never born, but rather grown in a lab, that he doesn't have a real set of parents. I have a father, that all identification papers he has ascertained were fraudulent or based on fraudulent claims. Joel, is this true? Romwell asked with mock disappointment. Not entirely. We'll have to look into it. In the meantime, we'll need to hold you as an enemy combatant. An enemy combatant? I've never attacked the country. Not yet, Romwell responded calmly. We must assume the worst. Look, son, step into the suit. We won't forget it when you have your military tribunal. A rage swelled up within Joel. Surrounded by the menacing men, he vaguely remembered his anger and fear one night when he was 8 years old. A night he found himself surrounded by a pack of timber wolves. Then, as now, he had found himself in his predator's domain with little room to maneuver. Then a dense forest, now a suddenly claustrophobic hallway. Then, as now, his enemies saw themselves facing an easily manageable opponent. Joel had killed 3 of the wolves in under 2 seconds, sending a higher number scurrying away. He looked around at the complacent faces, felt the snickers sublimated to opaque smirks. He looked back at the suit. His knowledge of chemicals told him it weighed at least 2,000 pounds. With an effortless motion, he snatched the suit and lifted it from the cart with one hand. Romwell had to shout, "Hold!" as several of the agents reached for their sidearms and involuntarily shouts went up. None of their sympathetic nervous systems were in snooze mode now. Joel reflected he could have killed 6 of them with one swing before any hand could grab a gun. He allowed himself a wry smile, then opened the suit and placed himself inside. Thank you, Joel. You have a visitor, by the way, Romwell said as the agents fastened the latches. It was like no laboratory the Major had ever seen or even imagined. Larger than the football field with row after row of every type of modern lab equipment he had ever seen, and many he hadn't. Let's take a closer look. They had loading equipment on the cargo planes at their beck and call that could handle even the multi-ton equipment here. They walked about 150 yards down the brightly lit room with the buzz of powerful dehumidifiers in their ears. The major stopped them at a group of large incubators. More striking than their size was an apparatus tucked into the side of each, a compact conveyor belt with various attachments, allowing each to reach inside the incubator. One attachment contained a heating element. One had a large spring with a mallet at the end, another with a spike. Each incubator had a thick glass container at the top. "Looks like they were putting something through the ringer," the captain said. At the bottom of the incubator was a layer of thick synthetic muck. "Interesting," Major Pascal said to the captain. "I remember reading once about the Hercules beetle, the strongest animal in the world for their size. They can carry 850 times their weight. I read they got so strong because they have to burrow into the dense layers of mud, leaves, and other muck on the forest floor to survive. A lot like the stuff on the bottom of these incubators." They took photos from various angles before looking for the fasteners. "Getting one of these back home is priority number 1, the major said, motioning toward the incubators. He called back to the support team. The others had found a large cafeteria, classrooms, and training rooms. "Looks like the jackpot was down here, boys," the major said. "Let's see what we've got." A crew member took a screwdriver and began removing the incubator apparatus. "Unauthorized device detected. You have 10 seconds to enter override code." Loudspeakers blared. They did not have the code. A panicked exchange of glances were followed by an equally panicked and futile punching of numbers on the now conspicuous keypad. Their failure was announced by the synchronized coating of the incubators and all appendages with hydrochloric acid that rose from pipes in the floor that had previously gone unnoticed. The incubators melted immediately as the caustic liquid flowed out through minuscule pores. They looked like schizophrenic panhandlers as they were forced out of the room, holding their noses and rubbing their eyes as they cursed to no one and everyone. Making their way back to the lift, the major saw they had set off a chain reaction. Not just the incubator, but every piece of cutting-edge equipment now had the shape of sand sculptures battered by high tide. "Fuck," Major Pascal mumbled through the thick haze as they scrambled onto the platform. Stepping back onto the grass field, he said, "As soon as the smoke clears, we're going back and taking what we can. I don't care if it's just melted glop." "Yes, sir," the captain replied. The major's phone went off, a special urgent ringtone. "This had better be important," the frustrated major barked. "We're in the middle of a major operation." "Your operation is being cut short." The major recognized the voice of the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff. "Yes, sir," Major Pascal replied, immediately changing his tone. "We found the backup base for the CVs, and we've confirmed they are there. We might have a chance to preempt their attack after all. Start heading south. You'll be briefed along the way." "Where are we going, sir?" "The most inhospitable place on Earth. Now get going." Tim wished he was back at the Windham County Weekly for the first time in the past year. His aggressive reporting had caught the eye of an editor at the Washington Post 6 months ago. It hadn't taken much to make him leave. He was used to being sent out on dangerous assignments. He hadn't expected his most dangerous yet to be in the House chamber of the U.S. Congress. The air was thick with tension. The sweet confection of the politician's power and prestige had caramelized, coagulated into a sticky confection that trapped them within the chamber. An attack was probably coming, and this was supposedly the safest place to be, as fleeing would make them all the easier to pick off. Something about how they could probably be tracked by their DNA. The mood wasn't the only difference from a traditional joint session of Congress, however. The chamber was crowded not just with the members, but spouses and children as well. The kids ranged from nervous adults to blissfully ignorant toddlers whose mothers did their best to quell the rambunctiousness a quiet, formal setting so quickly engendered in them. Tim had just come from outside, where there was an array of sublime, surreal military might. Dozens of T-1 tanks, armored Humvees, and personnel carriers roamed the streets. At least 50,000 troops with M16s surrounded the Capitol, and thousands more with bazookas and rocket launchers. 4,000 E-50 variant M2 Browning machine guns were ready on their mounts, capable of bursts of upwards of 400 rounds per minute and using .50 caliber tungsten-tipped armor-piercing rounds. 30 or more Apache helicopters flew near the ground as 10 F-16s buzzed overhead. The streets had been blockaded with concrete barriers as a 3-mile perimeter around the capital was strictly enforced. It was a barrier that most, if not all, foreign militaries would have been unable to breach. The enemy was going to present itself openly and be lightly armed. They would be outnumbered 25-1. No one was confident they could be stopped. "Ladies and gentlemen, the president is in the chamber," Tim heard as he was jarred back to attention. The president strode to the podium, enveloped in the cheers of a rousing standing ovation. Over 1 billion people were expected to watch the speech worldwide. The president began. "My fellow Americans, and peoples of the world, as you are probably aware, 2 days ago my administration was given an ultimatum by Dr. Robert Harrington, Chief Executive Officer of NOTEC. This ultimatum was in response to the warrant for the arrest of Dr. Harrington and the thousands of men and women involved in his missions. These warrants were issued because of the illegal, irresponsible, and intolerable conduct of Dr. Harrington and his vigilantes, or community volunteers, to use his euphemism. Intolerable now, Tim thought to himself. The full litany of charges against Dr. Harrington and his group are still being reviewed. So no news tonight if treason was going to be added to the murder charges. Nonetheless, Dr. Harrington has taken it upon himself to place certain conditions on his surrender and those of his group. He has demanded the exclusion of a life sentence along with other conditions. The other conditions demanded retention of company involvement, access to research, no jail time for the CVs, and most importantly, precluding the release of the primes, had been widely reported. There was dead silence as the crowd waited for what she would say next. Her response to the ultimatum. No individual, no company, no organization is above the law. Dr. Harrington and the members of his group have every right to work within the legal process to attempt to negotiate terms. They have every right to seek exoneration in our courts. What they have no right to do is threaten the sovereignty and security of the United States and its people to achieve their ends. That is why I am compelled to reject Dr. Harrington's ultimatum and call on him to surrender himself to authorities immediately." A collective gasp. So war was coming. All that could stop it now was a sudden change of heart by Dr. Harrington, a rational, measured decision to be deferential and calmly work through the legal system. Unlikely. Decorum broke down immediately. The atmosphere in the House chamber now resembled that of the rowdy sessions of the English Parliament, with congressmen openly interrupting the now anticlimactic portion of the president's speech with objections. "Can we not negotiate, Madam President?" one shouted. "Our families are in danger." "Is this prudent, Madam President?" The country's leaders had been assured that even in a worst-case scenario, Dr. Harrington and his group likely wouldn't harm them, and that kidnapping would be the worst of it. They had not forgotten that the NOTEC CEO had made similar promises regarding his restraint in the past. The verdict on such assurances had been given by thousands of dead Bolivians and New Yorkers. Tim needed to get outside, where the more interesting theater would be, as his ambition overrode his trepidation. He knew his expendability had gained him his freedom from the capital more than his press pass, as he was led out a back door. Not that he was going far. The action was going to be right here, in the epicenter of American power. He had a feeling Dr. Harrington wasn't going to keep them waiting. Major Pascal looked down upon the vast, untamed wilderness as the debriefing ran through his mind. Not only had he never seen such a place, he never imagined such a place existed. Giant snow-capped peaks spread as far as he could see, even from 30,000 feet. There were no roads, no houses, no signs of civilization, or even an indication it could possibly exist here. "Welcome to the Wrangell St. Elias Mountains," he heard over the speaker. The mountains had a higher vertical rise, height from base to summit, than the Himalayas. Several of the mountains had a greater vertical rise than Mount Everest, including Mount Wrangell itself, which he was now passing, that dwarfed Mount Everest with an 18,000-foot vertical rise, versus 9,000 for Everest. He looked down upon the seemingly endless crevasses, deeper than 10 Empire State Buildings stacked one upon another, and shivered at the inescapable pitfalls they created. Why are we following the group here exactly? Pascal had asked pointedly. Headquarters had responded that their intelligence indicated the attack group in Washington had taken all of the modern weaponry. Furthermore, the rugged peaks, sheer drops, and superlative remoteness of these mountains made trapping one of the CVs much easier than in Washington. They felt that if they could put even one of the CVs in a helpless position, the leverage could be extremely helpful. I thought the CVs were the modern weaponry, Pascal had responded, and exactly who was trapping who here. His commanding officer conveniently had another transmission coming in before he could respond. All right, we've got some more specifics, the colonel said over the speaker. The CVs are on Mount Logan. Is that good or bad? It's bad. Mount Logan is across the border in the Yukon. It rises over 18,000 feet, with, again, a higher vertical rise than Everest. It is also much wider, the most massive mountain in the world, in fact, and the highest in Canada. And forget it being June helping you. The mountain range creates its own weather. A temperature below -100 Fahrenheit was recorded near the peak, and that was in May. I have a rundown here of all the ways you could die in this environment that I'm supposed to review. I think I have some idea, Colonel. Just give me our mission here. Fair enough. There is no need, Major, for you to kill the 100 or so CVs at this location. In fact, that would be counterproductive. You are to stop the apparently imminent attack on Washington. How? Trap one or more of the CVs. Force them into a position where they are at your mercy. And then send back the live images of the helpless CV to us. We'll use it as leverage. He must be in a position where you could clearly kill him. Is the death of one of his CVs going to be enough to stop Dr. Harrington? Isn't he putting thousands of their lives at risk? Our intelligence indicates Dr. Harrington thinks he can get away without any fatalities. These are not normal soldiers, and the threat of certain death of one of his men is far different than the possible death of even thousands. I guess, but... Major Pascal, did you send a check for $50 for starving kids in Uganda last week? No? No? Even though such a check might save a dozen or more children from starving to death for a while. I suppose, but... Now, would you write a $50 check to a gunman holding his weapon to the head of a Ugandan immigrant standing in front of you, if that was the gunman's demand? Of course. Well, there you have it. And these CVs mean a lot more to Dr. Harrington than a stranger. Besides, we'll be doing what we can to stave off the attack in Washington. Your mission is just part of our strategy. What if they just hole up inside the world's most massive mountain? It would be difficult for them to have set up too far into the mountain. We have some specifics of their location on the mountain and the firepower to get at them near the surface. How do the Canadians feel about us blowing up one of their national landmarks? We have their permission. This is a worldwide threat now, but don't worry about that. Just do your job. Pascal got the specific coordinates and radioed the orders. They were heading to the site with 50 heavily armed F-35B Lightning II jet fighters. Their opponents were armed with not so much as muskets. He had never feared an enemy more. The Major descended closer to the majestic mountaintops as the frigid wind howled. The fleet banked as they approached the gigantic 10-mile-long summit of Mount Logan, at a speed of about 150 miles per hour. The swirling snow dropped visibility to around 300 yards. He armed a sidewinder and approached the ridge where the group was hiding. He hesitated for just a moment. There was something the frigid conditions had prevented the infrared detectors from showing. A tall Asian woman was standing on a small outcropping, protected only by a black windbreaker. He had already roared past the woman by the time his brain had fully processed what he had seen. That was unfortunate, because the woman had been aiming what appeared to be an arrow at him with an advanced compound bow. Before he had a chance to veer back, his sensors blared. The arrow had penetrated the jet's single engine, and he was losing power. His eyes darted to the rearview mirror as a large explosion ripped into the ridge, sending rocks out in every direction. He turned back, barely missing a sharp spire as a blaze of pyrotechnics tore into the mountain. He did not see any dead or trapped CVs as his engine moaned to a screeching, scraping halt. Even as he reached for the eject button, a faltering jet fighter wobbled above him, with its own ragged hole below the engine bay. Pascal braced himself as he was launched, violently upward with a whoosh. When his senses recovered, he was surrounded by a fully engaged fleet, strafing by on all sides. He prayed for his wife and young daughter even as his state-of-the-art jet smashed into a neighboring peak. He crossed himself and prepared to die in the deathly, overpowering chill. Hey! Al Campano yelled at the 4 kids getting out of their beat-up old Grand Am. Man, they were an odd mix. They were 2 guys and 2 gals, all in their mid-20s or so. Looking at their buff bodies and fresh-faced complexions, you would have thought they were young lawyers or medical reps. But they were wearing these odd black army fatigues as they left their Pontiac, instead of the new Audi he would have expected their type to be driving. All that would have warranted merely a brief, curious glance, except they were leaving their car in the middle of DuPont Circle, dead stopped in the middle of the worst traffic he had ever seen at the intersection, which was saying something. Roads were blocked off and cars were backed up all over town on the bright summer Sunday afternoon, thanks to threats from this whack job from NoTech, Dr. Harrington. Al wasn't impressed by the CEO with his delusions of grandeur, but the Secret Service and military obviously were, enough to shut down all traffic in and out of the mall. "Hey, are you gonna move that car, asshole?" he yelled at the driver. Granted, there were 4 of them, and the guys were a little bigger, and they were all a lot younger than he was. But Al thought these people looked like the types that would back down as soon as you messed up their collar. But the group neither stepped toward him nor backed away. They didn't bother saying a word, either, which further enraged Al. They just gave each other calm, nonchalant looks as they decided what action to take while Al and a growing chorus of horns blared in protest. As Al stepped to the arrogant crew, convinced they were simply going to leave, they did step forward, but not toward him. Instead, 2 of the young people, a girl and a guy, picked up the 2-ton Pontiac as if it were made of cardboard and tossed it nose down 30 feet onto the lawn of the center plaza with a resounding crash, narrowly missing visitors to the elaborate fountain at the center as the group walked off. Tim found himself on the steps of the Smithsonian Air and Space Museum, armed only with a writing pad and an earphone, receiving feeds worldwide. An inside source had tapped him into the military's communications for the presumptive upcoming battle. He had been out here now for 2 hours, and he was starting to feel a little like the last time a date ghosted him. There were rumors the CVs might abscond while dishing out vigilante justice on any primes released. Any of the buildings lining the mall's half-mile stretch of well-trodden grass would proudly do as the capital of a large nation. Measured in blocks rather than square feet, they represented the quintessence of American power and ingenuity. They were places you could spend a day in and feel as though you had traveled the world. He stood across from the National Gallery of Art, with its neoclassical architecture and magnificent dome. The National Museum of Natural History and the National Museum of American History further up the mall were equally impressive, and at the end, the Capitol building itself. Pictures stole its grandeur. Looking at one of the countless photos of it, the Capitol looked like a decent-sized mansion with a big dome. Only here in person could one truly appreciate it. The grounds encompassed 273 acres in the middle of a major city, and just the building itself took up 16 acres, more than the Superdome. Those acres were now saturated with tanks, gun mounts, and soldiers, as was the half-mile between the Capitol and the Washington Monument. An attack on such a force was unfathomable. Tim waited for 15 more minutes. It seemed like 15 hours. Could there have been a last-minute change of heart? A sudden realization of the insanity of this attack? His camera had grown heavy on his shoulder. Wham! Tim jerked his head to the left to see what had just been unleashed and let out a much-needed laugh. A projectile had come roaring up and out of the Smithsonian Metro stop toward the rear of the mall, a good 10 feet up and 30 feet forward right onto the lawn of the mall. The first weapon Dr. Harrington used, with an arsenal of sublime weaponry and superpowered soldiers at his disposal, was a rusty, mid-'80s Kawasaki motorcycle with a rider fully ensconced in leather and helmet. It raced at breakneck speed toward its quarry for about 2 seconds. The vehicle jarred Tim and the cast of thousands out of their tense daze. The response was immediate. A hail of rockets and bullets blazed towards the motorcycle, shredding the vehicle like a mechanical hailstorm. Tim heard the CVs could take a lot of punishment, but not this much. He nevertheless squinted to see if the CV was going to get up. He didn't. He was a dummy, its leg now bent forward below the knee like the rag doll it was. Its hand had been tied to the throttle, leaving it open at full speed. "It's a ruse!" blared in his earphones, followed by chaotic crosstalk. It came too late. Projectiles came from other rooftops, ones that a moment earlier seemed strategically useless, ones giving no line of sight to the capital. Their high-pitched whistles were a pale reflection of the prior cacophonous barrage. Except this one was effective, targeting all the snipers who had just revealed themselves. They now slumped over, some with tranquilizer darts still in their shoulders or necks. His headset told him most of the others were down as well. "Get the reinforcements up there now," the general said on his feed. Peripheral guards and cameras were being taken out as mysteriously and efficiently as the snipers. 2 synchronized F-16s roared over the capital and out toward the incoming invaders. Tim craned to see where they would try to head off the CVs. It wasn't necessary. They were making U-turns. Only now did Tim see the aerator nozzles under the jets. Pandemonium broke out over his earphones as a heavy spray of gas blanketed the tops of the huge buildings. Only now did Tim notice there was no writing on the jets. They were facsimiles, albeit good ones, presumably from surreptitiously gained blueprints. Now everyone knew Dr. Harrington had planned for the contingency of this attack for years, not weeks. The tens of thousands of troops on the ground scrambled for cover and protected their noses and mouths as best they could, as the twin jets finished their run incapacitating the remaining rooftop snipers and approached the capital. They did not go unchallenged. A squadron of 24 more advanced F-35 Lightning fighters streaked towards the 2 ersatz F-16s with their GAU-12 equalizer cannons firing 25mm rounds at upwards of 4,200 rounds a minute from only about 200 yards. Erasing any doubt that CVs were in the enemy jets, the F-16s immediately whipsawed down and under the F-35s with a force that would have cracked the neck of an ordinary man. Tim reflexively dove onto unforgiving sidewalk as the nearest jet plunged to what seemed a certain crash before leveling off a mere 10 feet overhead, sending an ear-shattering reverberation through his entire body. Grimacing as he inspected a viciously scraped, bleeding elbow, Tim looked back toward the Washington Monument to follow the chase. The CVs had come. They were pouring onto the mall in what appeared to be a chaotic manner, but Tim suspected it was anything but. 50 of them were already at the back of the mall, not running, but rather leaping, twisting, and contorting themselves in 20-foot-high bounds like a group of acrobats from Cirque du Soleil, as an endless barrage of bullets and artillery headed toward them. They were wearing their Black Army fatigues with attached weapons that looked nothing like their enemies, which was not to say they looked more advanced, quite the opposite, in fact. They had weapons that looked like Uzis, presumably the infamous rapid-fire tranquilizer guns and custom carbon fiber compound bows with double the normal layers of strings. Strapped to their backs were steel cones about a foot in length. They looked heavy and had what appeared to be a compact explosive on their butts. This was the extent of the weaponry they were using to take on the world's greatest military. Their reputed dissolving weapons were nowhere to be found, as if the CVs were intentionally, if figuratively, fighting with one hand tied behind their backs. The gyrations of the CVs gave a patina of randomness, but a closer look revealed they were presenting the smallest mark possible, sensing and avoiding the countless projectiles with their minuscule variances in trajectory, all while moving forward rapidly. This was not all they were tracking. Within seconds of their appearance and before the first Air Force jet passed over, an African-American female CV landed on her feet, crouched, knocked an arrow, and launched it at a 15-ton F-35 jet 200 feet above, all in one smooth motion. The arrow streaked into the jet's engine compartment and out the other side instantaneously. The scenario repeated with the other dozen visible jets within seconds, and all were now faltering as they flew over the CVs with sputtering pot shots instead of a collective roar. "Back to base! Back to base!" the general blared over Tim's headphones. He gathered the jets should have enough time to get back to Andrews Air Force Base, but no farther before crashing, as was Dr. Harrington's plan. The rapid-fire tranquilizer guns were unleashed. The strategically epileptic acrobatics of the CVs continued, but now with the blazing pistols in hand. Hitting anyone hundreds of yards away while jerking around seemed impossible, but the CVs went far beyond such a feeble goal. Rather, the soldiers targeted were far from random. Those behind the Browning-mounted guns and other weapons that could take out the CVs in seconds were the first to fall. They collapsed so quickly it seemed a taut cable connecting all the gunners' legs had been yanked hard. And now the steel cones revealed their purpose. Picking their spots in the hailstorm of gunfire, the invaders flung the heavy projectiles toward the tanks. The cones shot off their backs and through the Kevlar composite tanks. The spiked cones tore through the M1 armor, with the strength of 24 inches of steel, like so much aluminum foil. Smoke poured out of the breached tanks. No subsequent explosions or cries of pain, just an eerie silence as the superlative M1s were defeated at their most vulnerable point, their operators. "Tell your tank operators not to get up," came a warning on an intentionally open channel. Their throws were obviously aimed to pass into the tiny unoccupied areas inside the tanks, unoccupied as long as no one moved. Not all messages from the CVs had to be communicated so overtly. Others had noticed the invaders' expert tracking and superhuman dodging of their enemies' projectiles. "Stop aiming at them," the commanding general blared. "Smother your zones, blanket your area." The attack from the CVs had come so quickly. The soldiers had reacted instinctively, trying to pick off individual targets, but now they fell back into formation and utilized a strategy that had been employed since the Revolutionary War, one particularly well adapted to these most unusual of enemies, ones who could dodge bullets. Each soldier simply shot at an assigned spot, mostly ones with no target in sight as they fired. Individually, it seemed futile and wasteful, but collectively, with the thousands of soldiers firing simultaneously, it provided their only hope. Even the incredible skills of the CVs were strained and neutralized as every configuration of adult-sized space that they might jump or twist into was covered with armor-piercing rounds. The CV's reaction was immediate. The 2,000 of them spread out, then coalesced into groups of 4, each member of the quartets moving forward in a rotating single-file fashion, so no individual received a lethal dose of bullets. The effect was like a kaleidoscope with its converging patterns, crisscrossing acrobatics lit up by deadly pyrotechnics. The CVs did far more than simply duck and cover for each other, however. Having taken out most of the heavy artillery and weaponry, the CVs now tore into the heart of the American forces, firing at over a round per second. The tranquilizer guns took out the infantrymen so quickly, it appeared a barreling slew of marbles had been poured right by their feet. With the CVs still a quarter mile from the capital, the barrage they faced slowed to a trickle. "Bring in all remaining forces, land and air," General Long said, desperation in his normally steady voice. "Sir, are you sure? We're not even half an hour into this. The capital will be wide open if those forces fail." "That's what we're faced with now, either way." "Now, how much would you pay?" Ron yelled into the secure line jubilantly. His secret government contact was on the other line. "I don't know how to stop them," Ron responded to his colleague, with less enthusiasm this time. "I've already told you what I know and done what I can. I even arranged for the dissolving guns not to arrive. But I'm not sure we can stop them. Isn't that the whole point? But I can tell you this. We've already won. Even if the military finds a way to stop the CVs now, we've already won. The CVs are now the most powerful and the most lucrative force on Earth. The world has seen that now." "I'm not sure, as I just said." "Holding out on you? The CVs are going to end up on your side because of me. You call that holding out on you?" "Your side or my side? It's the same difference." "Of course we'll keep it that way. I'll let you know if I discover anything helpful." Ron hung up and dialed Hector. It was time to tweak his protection device for someone additional, just in case. Joel's pulse quickened as he saw Tina led into the holding area. His excitement turned to embarrassment as the look on Tina's face reminded Joel he was ensconced in a giant Teflon egg. "Joel!" Tina cried as she ran to the cell. "What is this thing they have you in? Are you in pain?" "I'm not," Joel replied with all the reassurance he could muster. He didn't bother adding that a normal man would have been in agony. His arms and legs had been contorted to minimize leverage for over 18 straight hours. Joel had let his bones regress back to a fetal state, in which they were made more of cartilage than bone. Tina turned to the balding, pot-bellied guard. "What have you done to him?" He's doing all right. He's right where he belongs. Have you seen the damage his buddies have done? The guard motioned toward the news coverage of the lopsided battle taking place about 5 miles away. He was wearing earphones, ostensibly to comply with noise rules, but Joel sensed the guard's satisfaction at seemingly ostracizing his prisoner from the fascinating coverage. Joel could hear every word. He saw the CVs advancing for the first time, and then something much more disturbing. Tyler McKinney hadn't always been a highly decorated fighter pilot. He remembered all too well when he had been known as McSkinny, an awkward, scrawny teenager. His worst tormentor had been John Signorelli, a guy with 2 years and 30 pounds on him, who had reminded him of that appellation daily. Tyler remembered once looking into a mirror after Signorelli had mocked him. He remembered his face contorted with humiliation and impotent rage. It was the look he saw now, on the face of his proud wingmen as they flew back to base with their faltering, smoke-spewing jets and holes in their engine compartments, just like his own. His last memory of John Signorelli hadn't been one of an endless string of degradations, however. It was 2 years after that stare in the mirror, 2 years of training and preparation, followed by his tormentor on the ground with a fat lip and a broken nose. Tyler pulled back on the throttle of his jet and whipped toward the mall. Dr. Harrington didn't think about how the battle was going well when he saw his troops advancing. For him, that would have been like a man chasing his child's kidnapper distractedly pondering if he was catching up with the abductor. Failure wasn't just not an option. It wasn't even a thought. Dr. Harrington was in a room that minimized distractions. He was in a 10 by 10 white cinder block room with a simple 19-inch TV screen, about 6 feet away from his black leather swivel chair. A couple of fluorescent lights shone from the drop ceiling overhead. He had relayed instructions for this storage room to be set up a floor down from the lowest basement level of NOTEC headquarters. The hundreds of men who had been in the building looking for the most wanted man in the world had walked above him all this time. Construction was canceled just before a stairway or elevator entrance had been built. Instructions were given to just leave the stuff that was down here for a possible write-off. Officially, the room had never existed and never would. The only entrance was a 2-inch diameter hole tucked behind a fire alarm that only, say, a mouse could get through. The room was invisible and inaccessible for any person in the world. Any person but him, and one other, that was. And he had no fear that one other would seek him out now. He had everything he needed to place his undivided attention upon the battle playing out on his screen. Then he saw something that made even his obsessive focus shift, and his stomach tighten like a noose. A smoking, wobbling jet had returned to the field even as the groaning of its pierced, off-kilter engine filtered through a suddenly quiet crowd. As the jet approached the Washington Monument, its weapons inert, Dr. Harrington saw its cabin was totally obscured with smoke. The camera managed a clear shot of the jet streaking over the Potomac River. Then a huge fireball as the jet crashed into one of a series of indistinguishable apartment buildings in Crystal City, Virginia, indistinguishable on any other day. The call from Demetrius came within seconds. "Sir, did you see that?" "I did." "Are we continuing? Is there any change in plans?" "No." "Sir, the president would like to speak with you. We can ensure the connection won't be traced." "Put her on," Dr. Harrington said without hesitation, despite the unusual circumstances. The President of the United States came on the line. "It's time to end this, Dr. Harrington. You were wrong to think you could end this attack without killing anyone. It's time to stop before more people die." "Have you met my demands, then?" "Turn yourself in and we'll talk." "You have my demands. There's nothing further to talk about. I will not give up my leverage." The president grew enraged. "Leverage? We're hearing over 30 people died in that crash. That's all those deaths mean to you?" Dr. Harrington hesitated, feeling gut-punched. "The brave pilot died protecting the American people. The same thing I'm trying to do. He and the other victims died because his commander-in-chief was an obstinate, self-serving politician who put those she claimed to serve in danger. And don't worry about my leverage, Madam President. I will have plenty once you have been brought to me. I'll see you then." There was a resounding click. My God, the cold. It was a vice, squeezing Pascal's lungs and mind as the wind tore into him like a prize fighter with gloves covered in broken glass. He struggled to follow a thumping sound above as he sat near paralyzed, still in his pilot's seat on a ledge. He looked up to see a CV bounding down the mountain in enormous 50-foot leaps. Christ, won't I die fast enough? He's come to finish me already? Trembling and shaking, Pascal managed to pull out his sidearm and aimed it at the oncoming CV. Pascal had heard the CVs could tell whether or not a bullet was going to hit, and adjust accordingly. The CV did not bother adjusting. His target closing a distance of 30 yards to point-blank range in a split second. Pascal steadied his hand for one last shot before the CV rammed him. Even as Pascal pulled the trigger, the gun was kicked from his frozen, sensitive as testicles hand, with a move too quick to be seen. The CV ignored Pascal's agony and anger. "I'm Greg. You'll be dead in 30 seconds if you don't come with me." Pascal dropped his resistance with the relief of resignation as Greg put a heated blanket around him, lifted him from his seat, and started jumping up the peak with no discernible hindrance from carrying a 190-pound man. His lucidity returning, Pascal surveyed the surrounding battlefield. He saw unmitigated devastation. Remains of the jet fighters were scattered over the upper reaches of the massive mountain, still smoking in their ruin. His fellow pilots had also been turned from fearsome attackers into supplicant victims. Several comrades were being carried up the slope like frozen rag dolls, too. Pascal hoped they were doing better in Washington. Before they had reached the summit, he realized they weren't. He heard a distinct buzzing overhead. Several massive C-130 bombers were about 1,000 feet up. The bombers had no hope of launching a targeted precision attack. They were designed to do something the Canadian government would never have permitted. Take out the CVs by taking out huge chunks of Mount Logan along with them. A no-go plan if they were stopping the CVs in Washington. Could his fellow pilots see him? Pascal couldn't be sure. Greg reached a man-made cave with Pascal over his shoulder, but so had a C-130, which dropped a 15,000-pound daisy cutter from directly overhead and only 100 yards above as they leapt into the crevice. Tina and Joel looked at the plane crash together. Then they saw the CVs moving forward anyway. Tina did not hesitate. "You should stop them." Still processing what he had just seen, Joel was taken aback. "I don't know, I'm sorry these people just died, but it wasn't Dr. Harrington who put me into this contraption." "I don't want you to do it for them," Tina said, motioning toward the guard. "Not for the president either, and not for the men at the Reform Center." "Why, then?" "Because I saw the look on your face that day. That day Dr. Harrington forced you to help him with that massacre. A look like you were being forced to do something you absolutely did not want to do. Like you would have rather died. That look could be on the face of everyone in the world if Dr. Harrington isn't stopped today." Joel said nothing, but nodded pensively. "I would have to become a monster." "Not to me you wouldn't be. I'd just see you out there trying to save us." "That's good to know," Joel said with a smile. "That doesn't mean I won't turn away if you get too ugly." Joel laughed, but quickly grew more serious again. "It might not matter. They might not let me out of this thing." "Maybe so. Are you ready to see if they'll let you off the hook?" Tina said, motioning toward the guard. Joel nodded. "I'll do it," he said. Tina walked over to the guard and relayed Joel's offer. He was annoyed at being taken from the news coverage and rolled his eyes, but picked up the phone. While the guard was on hold for someone in authority, he said, "I don't see what difference it makes. I heard 3 of these guys took you down. There are a couple thousand out there now." Joel did not raise his voice. "Yeah, well, I've learned some new tricks since then." The guard scowled, but did not put down the phone. He grew more animated as he spoke with a series of incrementally more highly placed officials. "Besides, it's going to take forever to get you out of that thing," the guard said, regarding the enormous Kevlar straitjacket in which Joel found himself. Someone came on the line with the authority to jar the guard into a respectful tone, interrupting his diatribe. "Okay," the guard said as he finally hung up. "I got the go-ahead. Agents are on their way. But like I said, it's going to take—" The guard dove down as Joel's shackles exploded violently outward. Dozens of remnants smashed through the walls of the holding area, including a part the size and weight of a large barbell that nicked the top hairs of the guard's head. Joel was gone. An avalanche of dust, cement, and insulation poured down from a suddenly gaping hole in the ceiling of Joel's cell. The guard dusted himself off and hid his amazement. He saw none of the heavy fragments of the Teflon egg had come near Tina. Not a bad escape, I'll give him that, but he'll need to do more to stop 2,000 CVs. Tina did not give a direct response. "You better turn that TV back on," she said. "You don't want to miss this." Joel smashed through, then soared over the massive CIA headquarters. Now, a 10-foot, 1,500-pound Gigantopithecus, the largest primate in history, he signaled his chromosomes to shift as he tapped the plant genes within him to pull sustenance from the surrounding air. From his huge hands, parallel streams of energy shot out over the city and around a radio tower, drawing in silicon and oxygen atoms from the air, then bonding them together with precise electric pulses. The energy beams were transformed into tightly wound silicon coils. In the instant after, the rubbery tendrils pulled his now falling ape body forward. That body was sloughed off in chunky heaps, and a streamlined hummingbird body shot forward toward the mall. The CVs were moving toward, and then over large, eerily silent groups of tanks and comatose soldiers. Then one of the counterfeit jets returned. Tim followed the sound as it appeared low over the mall again, and traveled unhurriedly toward the Capitol. A flap under each wing opened, and what looked to be 2 custom-made missiles dropped into firing carriages. An arming light switched on just as his side vision caught a small blur above the jet. What was it? A drone? His neighboring reporters had also noticed the object. "What is that? It's a bird! It's a plane! No, wait, it is just a bird," one said. And so it was. It circled around, coming down from the hellacious speed at which it had entered the mall. The bird started to dive on an intersecting path with the jet. Now he recognized the sleek avian predator. A peregrine falcon. He knew that they could reach speeds of over 200 miles an hour, which in this case would simply hasten its death. Its wings tucked back, the falcon streaked downward, accelerating rapidly by the second. It was going the speed of a race car at full tilt as it failed to divert from the path of the oncoming jet a couple 100 yards down. With the sound of 3 quick beeps, the back of the jet's missiles lit up. Tim looked away from the death of the regal bird now, just about 20 yards above the plane, and heard a sound like a full-speed locomotive hitting a boulder. Jerking his head upward, he saw the missiles fire but go awry, sailing over the Capitol and out to sea. The jet lurched forward and downward, then crashed on its back as its cabin was crushed like tinfoil, spinning and sputtering as soldiers scrambled. It slid down the street on its back with a horrific, undulating vibrato groan and showers of sparks as it narrowly missed a few brave souls, pulling their tranquilized comrades out of its path. Soldiers surrounded the downed plane within seconds and went to pull out the upended pilot. He was gone. That's the end of this one, folks. Thanks for listening. Stay tuned for the next installment. Smash that like button and make sure you subscribe and share with your friends. We'll see you next time.